Self-Love for Superwomen with Love Now Media. I'm your host, Tonya Ladipo, and I am so excited. I have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Cheryll Rothery, who is a clinical psychologist, to talk with us about depression today. So I know we're going to get a lot of great information as we have our discussion. So thank you so much, Cheryll, for being with us today. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
Tonya.
So as we're talking about depression and thinking about depression, first, I guess if you can just give a definition of what is depression? Because don't we all feel the blues? Don't we all feel, depressed sometimes? So what exactly is depression?
Yes, so you're right. We do all feel the blues sometimes. We do all get sad sometimes. We do all experience grief sometimes. But clinical depression has to do with a number of symptoms that are more intense and that last for a longer period of time.
Okay.
So, for example, when people have trouble sleeping, either they're not sleeping at all or they're sleeping all the time. When people have an increased appetite or a decreased appetite, they don't want to eat at all. When people lack energy, when they are not able to receive pleasure from activities that usually give them pleasure. Sometimes people start to feel hopeless. Sometimes people start to feel suicidal.
Okay.
So those are examples of some of the symptoms of depression.
So, suicide aside, because I understand that is obviously a very different, serious component of depression, but some of the other things you were talking about with eating too much or not eating enough or not being able to fall asleep or sleeping too much, in today's world, that seems like a lot of us. That sounds like a lot of us. And so I'm curious, is depression part of our human experience now in today's time?
I don't think depression is part of everyone's human experience. Certainly, some of us have a biological predisposition to be vulnerable to depression. All of us experience life and the ups and downs and stressors of life, and so there may be times when we experience some of the symptoms that you and I just mentioned. But clinical depression is different. It's more severe, and it also is chronic. And so say, for example, if a person is having a multitude of symptoms over a couple of weeks and not having any part of the day where they are able to feel better or feel good about anything, then we're talking about depression as opposed to the ups and downs of life that we all experience.
Okay, so it sounds like a key factor is when it is lasting. And it's not just for a specific moment.
Yes, and also when it impacts our functioning.
Okay, what does that mean?
So you can feel stressed, but still be able to get up and go to work. Still be able to take care of your family. You can be sad. You can be down, but still basically able to do those things. Depression interferes with our ability to do those types of things. It interferes with our ability to function in the ways that we normally function.
Okay. So it seems to me, I think if somebody is in bed all day long, they can't get out of bed, they're not taking care of their kids as well as they would have, they're not hanging out with friends, that seems like somebody who could be depressed.
Absolutely.
Right? What about people who don't fit that mold? So I'm thinking, especially when you think about Superwomen, I think of Superwomen as high achieving, successful, they're kind of goal oriented, and they're constantly on the go and they're doing a lot of things. And so what would depression look like in somebody who kind of fits that mold of being a Superwoman and taking care of everybody?
So you make a really good point. Depression can look different on different people. And so the type of woman you just described, her symptoms might present in the form of irritability. Okay. And just constantly on the move, refusing to stop. And I think part of the fear of stopping is that I'll never be able to get going again. And so it can manifest in many different forms, which is why it's so important to sit down and talk to people and have them open up and let you know what's going on, because you don't know until you have a conversation about the possibility of depression or anxiety or some other mental health issue.
Okay. So is there a difference that you've noticed in your practice of working with Black women or women of color in terms of how they present with depression, like what it looks like for them? Does it happen to them more often, less often?
I guess in my experience, what I find is that it is challenging to have my African American clients acknowledge that they're depressed.
Okay.
I think that any mental health diagnosis is hard to accept. I think that healthy cultural mistrust of the mental health field makes it hard to accept a label. And so my goal is to really move away from that and talk about how they're feeling, what their symptoms are, and to focus less on labels, but focus more on what are you experiencing and what can we do to address it. Okay.
And so I am curious, because you're talking about the stigma, and a lot of African Americans, there is a strong stigma about therapy. So what would you say therapy does? Like, why should somebody see a therapist? And then also when?
Okay. I think that, we, because of our cultural mistrust of many systems, including the mental health system, we've always gone to alternative sources for support. And there comes a point when those sources are no longer sufficient and you need additional support. So that's not to say you should not rely on traditional sources of support, but sometimes you need something else. And so a lot of times when clients come to see me, they've tried other things first.
What are some things that they've tried?
So they may often turn to religion, turn to spirituality, turn to kind of their village for support. And again, those are all very, very valuable resources. But again, sometimes you need something more. If you find that in utilizing your normal support system and sources of support, you're not feeling better, you might be even feeling worse, then it's time to seek out a therapist. And in terms of when is the right time to do that, I often say therapy is good anytime, because I think that prevention is better than intervention. And so therapy can be helpful for a wide variety of issues, but certainly depression that is not lifting, symptoms that are not lifting, impaired functioning, inability to do your job the way you're used to doing it, function at home the way you're used to functioning at home. So I think one of the risks for Superwomen is that we don't pay attention to our needs. We might be exhausted, we might be stressed, we might be overwhelmed, but we ignore the signs and symptoms and messages about that are coming from within. Or sometimes we seek unhealthy ways to address that. And so we might self-medicate so that we can keep going. And self-medication might come in the form of maybe taking various medications to keep us going. It might come in the form of drinking. It might come in the form of other unhealthy behaviors that might help us to feel better in the moment, but they're really not addressing the problem. And so now we have two problems, right? We've got depression, and then we've got these forms of self-medication that we've been using that are not, again, are helpful in the moment, but not in the long term.
Yeah, and when you talked about alcohol, I was thinking, because it's so socially acceptable, especially I think for high-achieving people in the business world. There's happy hour, there's drinks with dinner, I have to have a glass of wine when I come home, and that turns into 2 or 3, and that's every night. And people talk about it like that's, a healthy way of being in the world. And so I think that is a really good point of perhaps if you are drinking often every day, that might be something to consider as an indicator that maybe there's something I should go talk to somebody and check out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you love somebody who's dealing with depression? Because it can be hard to watch somebody suffer. How do you love them?
Absolutely. I think the way we show love is to be present. I think that so often we get so busy that we ignore each other. And so what you want to do is to be attentive to the people that you care about. If you notice personality changes, if you notice them isolating themselves, if you notice them more irritable than usual, to sit down and have a conversation and try to get a sense of what's going on. Most importantly is to create a safe space where that person can be open, where they can be honest, and where they can be authentic with you. And sometimes, especially for Superwomen, it's hard for them to find that person and that space, because they're the superwoman. And so there needs to be someone with whom you can take off your superwoman cape and really talk about where you are and what's going on and what you need. And then the second thing you want to do is to listen without judgment. Sometimes we can inadvertently judge people for the way they're feeling or the way they're thinking. We can also sometimes say things that we think are going to build them up, but they really make it hard for them to disclose. Like, oh girl, I know you got it. Okay. You're strong. Okay. I know you can handle this. I know how resilient you are. But what I've just done in that moment is I've said to you, it's really not okay to share how you really feel. And so to really be open to allowing them to be vulnerable in that moment. And then to help them mobilize the resources that they need for support. What have you tried? What worked in the past? What do we need to do now? And I say we because I'm going to be there for you and I'm going to do it with you. And so that's what I would recommend.
I think that's a great point. And that's actually one of my tips is that if you see somebody who's struggling, how can you support them and say, you look like you're struggling. Why don't we go see a therapist? I'll go with you to the first session. Because I think that can help break the stigma and really say, this is okay to do. You're hurting and let's get help. And so for the person who's struggling with depression themselves, right, after watching this, realizing, hey, that sounds like me, what would you say to that person about how they can really love themselves and to take care of themselves as they're dealing with depression?
So I think I would say, do the exact same thing to yourself as you would want a friend to do for you or that you would do for a friend. Sometimes we can be hardest on ourselves. And so I would recommend practicing loving kindness to oneself and being one's own best friend. Nobody should ever treat me better than I treat myself.
That is powerful.
You know, and
Can you say that again?
No one should ever treat me better than I treat myself.
So Dr. Cheryll just set a really high bar, I think, for all of us. If we're thinking that nobody should treat me better than I treat myself, that means I need to be really good to myself. Because I have people in my life who love me and who are kind to me and good to me. And I should be doing it better than they do it. That is a high, incredibly powerful, necessary challenge that Dr. Cheryll just gave us, which I appreciate. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank Dr. Cheryll for being our guest. I so appreciate your insights and your expertise.